Hello, welcome back to Let's Talk. I'm Tammy, a Senior Digital Marketing Manager here at the eWord.
And I'm Mariel, Head of Digital. I'm one of our directors. And today we've gotten together to talk about our predictions for the 26-27 booking cycle.
I think a really good place to start with our predictions is AI.
I think it's obviously been on everyone's minds. Everyone's talking about it this year. So much so that people are a bit bored of it maybe, but it is going to impact how we operate and run our campaigns next year.
For sure. And I think if we look at platforms like Google and Meta, Google is by far leading the pack in terms of their AI capability. You know, there are talks that they are removing Google Search and replacing it with Search Max AI. But then on the other side of the coin, we have Meta. And Meta is struggling a little bit. And it means that they are becoming a lot stricter with their interest targeting and they are leaving it a lot more broader.
Yeah, so then Meta, they've obviously got things like Advantage Plus campaigns, which means your control over targeting is much more restricted. But they've also got things like the special housing category and PBSA, which, although sometimes we can fly under that radar, more and more we're seeing that our clients' campaigns are affected by special housing. And this means you can't target by age. You're limited heavily on location targeting, and that really is going to change the way that we operate and launch campaigns on that channel.
I think that also brings to light two really important points. So I think the first one is first-party data. So Google, not so much. Obviously, first-party data is really important for Google, but especially for Meta, like they are going to rely on all the signals you can give them. And that's why first-party data for Meta is especially important. And then the other differentiating factor that you can have in the PBSA space on Meta is your creative and messaging. They are going to be more important now than they've ever been before, because with the interest targeting so broad, the only way that you're going to attract someone's attention fully is with messaging that stands out and creative that stands out even more.
It's using creative that specifically targets those people. They know that ad is for them, and that's just going to make the algorithm stronger and keep on reaching who you want to target. And I think that's something that PBSA operators really need to focus on next year.
I think actually you raise a really important point, because with regards to algorithms, people are not being fooled by very plain ads anymore. Like they are coming to expect a world of AI where the advertiser knows exactly what they want to see. And that goes even broader, even to closed ecosystems, where we're seeing that PBSA aggregators are offering solutions that are so wildly based on AI that it means that end-to-end purchase cycle, people are entering the aggregator sites, they're able to refine their search and find a property provider that is perfect for them, especially international students. It's great. And they go right through the funnel, and that makes aggregator sites an incredible competitor at the moment.
And so I think operators really need to look at their websites for next year. What is that UX journey? What is that booking journey? Because we know that a hard booking journey turns people off anyway, but that's going to become even more important when there's experiences out there that are seamless and much better. They're going to be using those sites rather than going direct to the operators' sites. So yeah, it's definitely a focus on websites for next year too.
I think what you say about user experience is really important, because it's one of the things that needs to be considered along with diversification of media channels. So we need to accept the fact that Google and Meta are not the only forms where we can get leads and bookings anymore. It's going to Snapchat, it's going to Reddit. You know, Reddit is one of the most popular channels used by Gen Alpha, and Gen Alpha is coming for us, and we need to accept that. We need to be ready for it. And the fact that they use Reddit is an interesting point for me, because traditionally platforms like Reddit and all other brand awareness channels, we worry that, you know, they won't bring in leads and bookings, but we need to consider that perhaps Gen Alpha is turning the tide in the way they interact with those channels. And perhaps, you know, from next year and onwards, we will start to see more leads and bookings from channels that have traditionally been brand awareness.
I think on that point as well, though, we know that the cost of accommodation is becoming an even more prevalent challenge for students booking, and it's such a big investment that they're taking longer to make those decisions. So alongside the change in behaviour of the generations like Gen Alpha, it's the journey to make that decision is taking longer because it's such an investment for them. So they need all those different touch points to help them make that decision. They're not just going to see a Facebook ad and convert and spend how much money on where they're going to live for a whole year. So we do really need to include those different touch points to nurture them until they can convert.
I think that's a really interesting point that you make about the fact that students buying behavior is different throughout the year. Traditionally, we've used Google search volume as the holy grail to understand what that search volume looks like throughout the year. And we traditionally manipulate our campaigns based on those peaks and troughs. But what we need to understand is that that Google search volume that we are also reliant on, that brings into consideration the keywords that competitors are bidding on at different times in the year as well. So it's not just the searches that are happening by students, but it's also the competition that's happening throughout the year. That's why in the UK in particular, we see November as our like one of the peak times, but actually it's just because that's when everyone goes live. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's when students are searching for accommodation. So the shift that we've understood by looking at other formats and other forms of traffic to understand what search volume actually looks like, we actually see outliers like March becoming, massive peaks for places like the UK.
But I think on a completely separate note, we've seen over the last couple of years international students come into the UK and other countries that were advertising PBSA, and it is down. Obviously, there's lots going on in the world that has contributed to that, but the numbers are there that we are getting less, and that's obviously going to significantly impact PBSA, because a lot of the time international students are paying at a higher price point.
I think the shortfall that you're describing there in terms of international down year on year, across the globe, except for Spain. I mean, if you look at the headlines for Spain, they are literally welcoming international students with open arms, which is fantastic. But for the rest of the globe, there is massive evidence to show that international market is down year on year. So it's really important to find other avenues of reaching out to your domestic market, and not to go back to channel diversification, but also just focusing on the channels that you do have. Where are your untapped markets? Should you be leaning into parents a little bit more? Should we be finding avenues like Snapchat, which is the only channel that you can actually advertise to 17-year-olds on?
And this is something that we have already tried to do this year. So for one of our clients, we had a building that was heavily Chinese students, and we knew that there would be less Chinese students coming this year, and that market would be smaller to market to. And we've managed to change that around. And if you look at the demographics year on year, their domestic proportion is way higher because of the changing in strategy. And I think that's something we're going to have to continue into next year, with lots of different buildings who are still relying more heavily on that international market.
Yeah, for sure. I think when we talk about domestic, it's really important to remember as well that we've gone back to pre-COVID times. So universities are becoming a lot stricter with their acceptances and their admissions. Yeah. And that means that a lot more students are going to be facing cancellations.
Yeah.
So that needs to be part of a strategy that you do for any domestic market. You need to start thinking about it now, because you need to start thinking about, if you reach occupancy and all of a sudden that plummets, what are you going to do?
Well, that is a lot on predictions for us today, but that barely scratches the surface. But I think everyone who works in the PBSA industry knows that it's ever changing. Things go fast and you can't stay still. We can't afford to do that. So I think that's everything for today.
Yeah. I mean, these predictions are really exciting. I'm excited for the 26-27 academic year. And if you want to read more, then you can click on the link below and you will be able to read more about our predictions from the eWord for the next academic year.